Hello, everyone. My name is Jenny Swanson, and I am one of the child bereavement coordinators for Penn Medicine Hospice. I work primarily with youth that live in Philadelphia, all over the city. And I'm here today to talk a little bit about coping with loss. I'm going to talk about it from the lens of extroversion and introversion, just because that can be a helpful way to look at it and to see how and why your child might grieve differently than yourself, or your child might grieve differently than your other child. And I hope that that is a helpful way to look at things. So I will start sharing my screen. I have a PowerPoint. And so again, I will be talking about coping strategies for grieving youth. This presentation is appropriate for guardians of children. It's also appropriate for the children to watch themselves. So please feel free to recommend that they do that. So how do you cope? That's a question for anybody watching this. That's a question for you to ask yourself about your kids if you are their caretaker. Every person copes differently with everything that comes their way, and that includes grief. And that's okay. There is no right way to cope with something like grief and loss. And like I said, just for a helpful lens, I'm going to look at this today through the lens of introvert and extrovert. So some basic definitions. Someone who is more introverted typically receives their energy from within themselves, and they experience varying levels of energy depletion when they're around other people. So this does not mean that they never want to be around other people, but it means that they might want to be around other people for more limited times. It means that they might want one-on-one more than they want larger groups, things like that. But we'll get into that a little bit more later. And a basic definition of someone who is extroverted, that means that they receive energy from socializing with other people, and they may actually experience energy depletion with too much solitude. So being alone for too long can actually be exhausting for somebody who is more extroverted. I personally think of introversion and extroversion as kind of on a spectrum. So somebody can have elements of both. Some people might vary from day to day or week to week. And there are some people who are really highly introverted and some people who are really highly extroverted. Again, all of these are okay. So for more introverted youth, when they come up against grief or having lost somebody, you might find that your introverted youth is having a more internal emotional process. It's okay if they don't want to talk a lot. Having said that, you could still check in on them, see if they're okay, let them know that you're there for them if they do want to talk. Someone who's more introverted might benefit from more quiet, expressive practices. So for example, journaling, they might enjoy having a one-on-one counselor or a peer that they can talk to, but probably just one at a time. Exercise can be helpful. Maybe they want to read about other kids who have experienced loss, things like that. And someone who's introverted might start to feel overwhelmed by rituals that involve multiple people, such as a funeral, for example. So if they go to a funeral or a memorial, they may need to take breaks. And again, that's okay. And they may benefit from bringing like a journal or a sketchbook or maybe a book to read, so they can have some alone time if they need it. For more extroverted youth, someone who's more extroverted might enjoy processing more outwardly with other people. And so it's okay to let them talk as much as they need to about their deceased loved one. Much as we might look at a child who's not talking enough and say like or not talking very much and say, you know, they must be suffering and that's why they're not talking. When that isn't always necessarily the case, it's just that they're more introverted. Sometimes we might look at an extroverted youth and say, why are they telling everybody about their person who died? That's so inappropriate. But actually, it's okay, typically. It's typically that they just need to be processing this stuff with other people. That is how they understand their own emotions. So they will likely benefit from expressive practices that involve others. So for example, maybe a grief support group for youth, more activity-based grief expression or group events. And they might want to talk to a lot of different people, friends, family members, teachers, counselors, etc. And these kids might actually feel more sad when memorial rituals end and family and friends stop checking in as much, as opposed to a more introverted youth who might have felt overwhelmed by all of that. And again, everybody can have elements of all of these things or fall somewhere in the middle. So which type of griever are you? Do you find yourself as someone who's more introverted, someone who's more extroverted? Are you somewhere in between? I find that these little memes here are helpful. So what are some things introverts love? Solo activities like reading or doing artwork. Canceled plans. Maybe look at that little schedule. It says today you work and a party, and the party was canceled. They might feel relieved about that. That's okay. Rainy days where they get to stay inside. Deeper conversations with other people. Small talk can be kind of draining for people who are more introverted. Daydreaming. They might prefer text messaging instead of phone calls. They might need to recharge their batteries by spending time by themselves at home. They like being home typically. And they like introspection. So you see that little pie chart. Thoughts, ideas, snacks. What's the meaning of life? Dogs, feelings. Those are some things that introverts might value. And then common signs of extroverts. An extrovert will be more energized by socialization. They might want to solve problems through discussion rather than first processing it in their mind and then speaking. They might need to be speaking through something to figure it out. Extroverts can be described as friendly and approachable. Our society sometimes tends to value extroversion more than introversion because of that. And that's why it can be helpful for us to let introverts know that we're here for them and whatever they need is just a-okay, right? And extroverts are typically open and willing to share their processes, even if they're pretty personal. And some extroverts really love to talk. So you might find that you are some of both. I myself am certainly some of both. And again, you might find that you are really deeply introverted or really deeply extroverted. And that will impact how your grieving process is. So these are some warning signs for something that's a little bit more complex. So if your kid is falling into some more or less helpful coping strategies, regardless of their extroversion or introversion, that might be a sign that they need more help. So some of these might be that still maybe several weeks or a couple months after the loss, they're still sleeping more than usual, more than 10 hours a day. They're still playing video games or something of that sort much more than they used to, almost as a coping mechanism that's helping them avoid their feelings. If they're eating a whole lot more than they used to, or they're eating a whole lot less than they used to, watching TV a whole lot more than usual, staying away from home more than usual, avoiding being home, or staying at home a lot more than usual. Maybe they're holding themselves up in their room, which again, that's okay for someone who's more introverted, but if it's way more than they used to, that might be a sign of something else going on. Increased drug or alcohol use in teens. These are coping strategies that allow for distraction or avoidance away from feelings. And those types of coping strategies, while they're fine for maybe a couple weeks after a loss, they're not the most helpful coping strategies in the long run. So I have come up with some ideas for different activities that could be helpful for young grievers of all ages across the introvert to extrovert spectrum. So this is a maybe obvious one, but looking at photographs. Look through photos, videos, whenever the person comes up, and if you want to have more of a connection with them, you can do that by yourself. You could do that with other people. If you're doing it with other people, you might help yourself tell stories, share memories based on those photos or videos. And if you want to take it a step further, create a scrapbook, maybe print out some of these pictures and put in photographs and mementos that remind you of your loved one. Artwork can be a great coping mechanism. Drawing and sharing memories that you have with your loved one. Again, you can do that by yourself or with other people. Some kids that I've worked with enjoy comics and like to create comic books, telling either about their loved one, about memories with that loved one, or like even just a specific moment with that person or about that person. Coloring or painting while listening to music that reminds you of that loved one can be really nice. And then I have also a project you can do that's on the next slide, which is a coping wheel. So how to make a coping wheel. This is going to be 2 paper plates. And on one paper plate, you're going to have drawn different coping mechanisms. And then the other one you'll spin and it will kind of point you to which one you want. So all you need are 2 paper plates, markers, and a little fastener to fasten those plates together. So first, using a marker, you'll divide one plate into 6 to 8 sections, say 6 or 8 sections. Label each section with a different coping mechanism that works for you. So you could put drawing, singing, meditating, going for a walk. Only include something that you would actually do because you know it actually helps. You can also draw a small picture of that coping strategy within each section if you are someone who likes drawing. On your other blank plate, cut out a triangle about the size of one of the fractions on your other plate. You can color that plate however you want. Then you're going to place the decorated plate on top of the plate with a coping mechanism. So you'll have decorated that on one side, so you'll keep that side up. And then you'll put the fastener through the middle of both of those plates, fasten it together, and now you can spin that top plate and see where it lands. If you're having a bad day and you just don't really know what to do, this can be a really helpful way to decide for yourself. Just let the spinner choose for you, and then do one of those things. Music is another great way to deal with loss. You can listen to music your loved one used to like. That can help get memories up, that can help emote if you need to emote in some way. Making playlists related to your loved one or related to different feelings or emotions that you have about the loss. Some people I work with use playlists to help themselves feel a certain way. So if they're feeling like they want to emote, they might have a playlist for that. If they're feeling like they need a boost, they might have a playlist for that. If you have access to any musical instruments, or if you just want to take some silverware and make your own drum from a silverware and a countertop, or if you have a bucket, like a mop bucket, you can turn it over and use those silverware as drumsticks. Playing an instrument, improvising based on your emotions, maybe just getting some catharsis. That can be really helpful. You can tell a musical story about your loved one. If you have access to, say, like a keyboard, you could just improvise and actively think about a story as you're improvising. You can write a song about your loved one. You can take a favorite song and change the words so that they are about your loved one. I'm a music therapist, so I have worked with kids on all of these different things and can, you do not have to have any prior music experience to be able to do this either with a music therapist or even by yourself or with other family members or friends. Writing is another really great way to cope. This can be writing in a journal. So some people dream about their loved one after that person dies. And when they wake up, if you want to remember that dream, it can be really helpful to immediately write it down. So that would be a dream journal. A gratitude journal can be a really nice way to, especially during hard times, to think about what are the things that do exist in your life that you're really grateful for? Or what are the things that exist about your loved one that you continue to be really grateful for? It can be really nice to have a consistent time and place to be remembering those things and writing them down. I recommend doing it every night and maybe pick 3 different things that you're finding yourself grateful for. And they can be the tiniest things, like you saw a very beautiful leaf falling outside, or that you had a really great lunch. But when you look back on those memories, you can kind of help yourself have a perspective on a more full version of your life, even when you're going through something difficult. In a journal, you can also just write about your feelings. It's another way to get your feelings out, especially for people who are maybe more introverted. Writing can feel a lot easier than talking to someone sometimes. And even writing to your loved one, writing a letter to your loved one, that can feel very connecting. And some people like sometimes even writing a letter to themselves from their loved one. Another way to feel very connected, especially with someone that you knew so well. If you enjoyed poetry, you could write poems about your loved one. You could write stories about your loved one. You could write your own biography about your loved one. All of these things are really great ways to use writing to connect with your person who you miss very much. And then maybe for younger kids, there are games that can be played that can help with grief. The beach ball memory game is you take a beach ball, you blow it up, and then you take a Sharpie and you decorate each section based on something about your loved one. So that could be a memory of your loved one. That could be different facts about your loved one, like what's their favorite food, what's their favorite color. Some kids have said things like, where are they now? And they might draw that on there. And then you can play a game with the ball. So you can throw it between each other, and wherever you can pick a finger, say it's your right thumb. Wherever your right thumb lands, you ask that question about the loved one, or you guess what that drawing means about the loved one. There are card games specifically for sparking memories about your person who died. They're typically created by different therapists. You can look them up. And also playing a card game that your kid loves, or playing any game that your kid loves, can be a really helpful way to kind of focus on one thing that's easy while you talk about your loved one. So it can kind of take the edge off of those really difficult emotions when you're focusing on something else while you're talking about it. So similar with different board games, but a game like Chutes and Ladders can offer a really good perspective on life. So Chutes and Ladders is this game where you climb up a ladder. If you get to a ladder, which means you advance more quickly, but then you might get to a chute and then you're sliding back down. And that can be a good metaphor for grief, because sometimes you feel like, all right, I'm doing okay. And then the very next day, you might feel like you kind of went backwards, but you didn't go backwards. You're just feeling your feelings more. And those things are totally normal and okay. And then there's a game called Rory's Story Cubes. Basically, it's for kids that are a little bit older, like maybe above the age of 8. And you can see all those little dice have little pictures, and they're really nice for creating stories. So you would roll all of them and create a story, either as a group, you could do it by yourself, and you can apply those stories to your person who died, or even to yourself about your own story. And those are just some suggestions. And lastly, this is a really nice read from a website I really like called whatsyourgrief.com. And this particular article talks about introverts and grief, mostly because of how much our society, again, values extroversion. So people who are more introverts might benefit from more validation about how they themselves process things more internally and maybe more quietly than extroverts. And again, all are okay. So I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, you can always contact me or the Child Bereavement Department. My email address is my full name, jennifer.swanson@pennmedicine.upenn.edu. You can please feel free to reach out. And please also check out other videos on the website. We really hope that these can be of assistance to you as you go through a very difficult time. Take good care, and thank you so much for tuning in.